Should Australians trust the government's online My Health record with their medical data?
And what can we expect from the pint-sized Nvidia Shield TV?
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined, as usual, by Tour de France super domestique Alex Kidman to channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. This week, we're also joined by a new guest in the Vertical Hold studio, ABC Radio National online technology reporter Ariel Bogle. Ariel, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
This week, we're looking at the backlash against the government's new My Health record, along with Nvidia's tiny Shield TV vying for a spot in Aussie lounge rooms. But first, over to the news desk. Alex, what's happening in tech?
Are Netflix's days as a streaming behemoth numbered? In its latest earnings report, it notes that it failed to hit projected new subscriber numbers and as a result earned less than expected. Netflix has been on a long, slow path to relying on its own originals content rather than licensed content from third parties, but with a shrinking library of actual titles as a result of emerging competitors, it appears to be struggling to sell itself purely on its own original shows.
Telstra's 5G plans are taking shape as the telco recently made its first end-to-end 5G call in conjunction with Ericsson and Intel. The call ran over the 3.5 GHz band at Telstra's Gold Coast 5G Innovation Centre. Telstra and Optus are aiming to launch commercial 5G networks next year, but despite reaching this milestone of the first voice call, the first 5G capable devices in Australia will be dongles and hotspots. Australia's first 5G voice services and capable handsets might not be available until at least 2020.
Ever felt bad about dropping your smartphone? As if to prove that some folks are exceptionally lucky, one US iPhone owner dropped hers out of a biplane this week at a height of 1,000 feet, or about 300 metres for us more metrically inclined folk. And it survived, reportedly without a scratch on it. Smart Money says it must have landed on a side that could spread the damage out, rather than face first. That's still good luck rather than good management, however, so don't expect Apple to suddenly start adding "can survive falls from planes" into its warranty information.
Amazon customers might have been enjoying the savings as the first Prime shopping day came to Australia, but Amazon's long-suffering warehouse workers were on strike across Europe in pursuit of better working conditions. There have also been widespread calls on social media for shoppers to boycott Amazon during Prime Day to protest the treatment of workers. Obviously, this didn't put too much of a dent in Amazon sales, with its website and mobile app crashing under the load when the 36-hour sale first kicked off. So it's a bit of a mixed-up show this week. Alex needed to duck out for the first half of the show, so we'll have a chat with Ariel first, and then we'll catch up with Alex later. Come to mention it, Ariel, I've never seen both you and Alex in the same room. Does that make you the superhero and him your secret identity?
Quite possibly. I mean, I can drop my voice several octaves when required.
That could be it, and Alex is known to run around in tights and a cape, so I think we might have uncovered something here.
Excellent.
Anyway, in the news, Alex mentioned that Netflix growth is finally starting to slow. Now, it's obviously a bit early to write off the streaming giant, isn't it, Ariel, just because it hasn't hit some expected subscriber numbers?
Definitely. I think Netflix is too big a giant to doubt just yet. You know, we really are addicted to seeing growth of subscriber numbers on all the new tech platforms, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, and Netflix. But, you know, there is an issue here with Netflix. It does appear in some ways to have reached the limits of its expansion. You know, it's got most English language countries. It's expanded aggressively into Asia, South America. But, you know, it really has to keep developing its offering to compete with some of the many other streaming services which are trying to get a foothold as well.
And as you say, it seems that they're being a bit unreasonable. That between April and June this year, globally, they put on 5 million subscribers. But apparently investors are unhappy because they're expecting 6 million. It's not... you can't just keep going on indefinitely when you've got new players coming in like Apple and Disney after a slice of the pie, can you?
That's right. I guess it's an interesting time for Netflix in the next few years. We'll have to see whether their original strategy, that's their strategy of developing their own proprietary content in favor of, going after rights deals with the big studios, will pay off. They'll really have to make those originals super enticing, make sure they've got the best actors in them, the best creators, to entice people to not only stay with the platform, but to get new people on it, which I think will be really interesting in some of the emerging markets. It will really have to be strategic in getting, even Australian creators on, Australian actors, and making sure that it's a really attractive offering with a lot of difference from the other streaming platforms. Here in Australia, of course, that might be Foxtel or Stan, who are also looking into creating Australian homemade content, as it were.
Like, as you say, they're dropping $10 billion on original content this year, but most of that would be American, and we're fortunate in that we're also an English-speaking audience, so we can take most of that. It doesn't matter so much if they don't have local content from us. But when you're trying to push into Asia, they're not going to be happy to just watch more and more Marvel TV shows. They're going to want more what they feel like is local content.
Exactly, yeah. It'll be really interesting to see what they develop in, say, a market like Korea, which has a really strong tradition of soap operas themselves. But, I think it's important too that we don't just accept that we in Australia get American content and leave it at that. We don't want to lose our own actors or lose our own voice. So I think it's important that there is pressure on companies like Netflix from their audience to make content and support local creators. Otherwise, it's a bit of, a bit too same. We all watch the same stuff as America, even though Australia has, a unique culture of its own.
So, Ariel, the idea of storing everyone's medical records in an online national database, which is open to a variety of people to access for a variety of reasons, sounds like the premise to a dystopian Philip K. Dick short story that you might see on Stan, but it's happening right now in Australia, isn't it?
That's right. So we've actually had this program for quite a while now. In 2012, the government launched an online digital health record service, but it was opt-in. You had to choose to want one, or your doctor would have to convince you to sign up. Now they've switched this year to opt-out. So from Monday until October 15, Aussies will have 3 months to tell the government they do not want one. Otherwise, by the end of the year, one will automatically be created for them.
So what are some of the reasons why people are concerned and thinking perhaps they don't want to be part of this?
Sure. Well, a lot of privacy advocates are really concerned that any centralization of data in a database this large necessarily becomes a target, whether it's, for hackers, that sort of more, newspaper headlines, people are really freaked out about a healthcare database of this scale going down and people's most sensitive personal data being exposed. But another really important issue here is the fact that this also allows more people than before to access your health records. So doctors on the other side of the country could potentially, in a bad scenario, look up the healthcare data of somebody who is not their patient. And of course, the Digital Health Agency, who's in charge of this initiative, said, that's strictly forbidden. There are severe penalties for that type of thing. But we have seen, just even with paper records, that people in hospitals have done the wrong thing and looked at the records of celebrities, for example. So these are the kinds of things that privacy advocates point to when arguing for people to opt out.
So it's not just locked to your GP and your specialist?
No, but you can put some access controls over your record. So if you decide you do want one, and there are benefits to having one potentially, it does put more control over your information in your hands. You can upload your, medications list. If you see a lot of specialists, you can make sure they're all looking at the same documents. But if you have concerns, you can put a number of controls over the top. So one thing you can do is set an access code and only give that code to the doctors you want to look at your records. Likewise, you can set a document access code. You can choose certain documents that might be more sensitive than others, and give the code for that document only to certain people. You can also set an alert system with SMS or email to let you know when a new provider accesses your record. You can also delete any records in there, any data, but at the same time, it's important to note that the Digital Health Agency is required to keep your data, if you have it in there, for 30 years past your date of death. So that is quite a long time, and something for people to keep in mind as well.
Part of the problem there is that those privacy features aren't turned on by default, are they? And it relies on people actually knowing about them and going into the settings and turning them on. And they haven't really done a lot to advertise that. They're not even having a public awareness campaign to let people know they have the option to opt out of this thing.
So this is something that privacy advocates are particularly concerned about. I think we all know from people's experiences with Facebook or their data on their phone that it's rare for people to investigate the security settings and make sure they're turned on in a way that they're comfortable with. And given that these...
Well, at least not until something bad happens.
Exactly. Until we get an Cambridge Analytica type scandal, people don't usually take action. So I think there is a big concern there that those access controls are not turned on by default. And as Trent Yarwood, who's from FutureWise, a healthcare advocacy group, suggested to me, he thought that most people would not even log on to look at their My Health record, let alone set those access controls, given the fact that it will be created by default. Some people might not even be aware one has been created.
And the other thing is, you said that I can set a code to say, all right, only my doctor can look at my records, or only this doctor can look at this file. But those codes can be overridden in some circumstances, can't they?
They can be overridden in an emergency. So say you're...
What do they call an emergency though? That's the problem.
Well, the example that was given to me by supporters of the scheme is, say you went to hospital and you were passed out, but you might have your driver's license on you, so they at least know your name. They could look up your record, access it, and override your controls and see, oh look, he's allergic to penicillin, we shouldn't give him any. But this is quite a... not a far-fetched scenario, but it's not the most common scenario. And as a lot of doctors have pointed out to me, it would be really a bad idea for any doctor to rely on documents in My Health record alone when it comes to, dictating somebody's care. You want to take someone's medical history yourself, examine them yourself before making any decisions. And the fact that people can delete or, keep controls over certain documents in their records suggests that it won't be a complete medical picture, and doctors shouldn't rely on it as such.
And even your doctor's not actually obligated to keep it up to date and keep everything in it. So there's nothing that says this thing has to be up to date and accurate, is there?
No, really, it's really up to the patient to advocate for themselves, or if a doctor's super keen on the idea, they do have the ability to start uploading documents into the record as soon as it's been created, unless the person asks them not to. So we are really relying on people having this open conversation with their GP or their doctor or their specialist every time they see them. It's probably a good idea to have that kind of conversation with your doctor, but I think we have to face the fact that not everybody will have that type of conversation, just like not everybody will be fully cognizant of the security controls they can put in place.
And it's not just doctors as well. If you look at the people who have the ability to bypass your security settings, it includes people who are looking at the enforcement of the protection of the public revenue and preventing and detecting crime and improper conduct. They are all very vague for my liking.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of open questions, and it would be a really good idea for government to come forward and be super clear about exactly what all this means. So there is a My Health Record Act that governs this whole process, and Section 70 of the Act talks about law enforcement access. And it says, that the agency has the ability to decide, based on its reasonable judgment about when to release information from My Health Record to law enforcement, say for investigating a crime or preventing one that was in action. The agency told me that it will assess each request like that on a case-by-case basis. They'll make sure it's from an enforcement body, but their operating policy is to release information only when the request is subject to judicial oversight. But as many other people have pointed out, that's a policy from them. They have a policy right now that they'll probably require a warrant, but we'll have to see whether that policy remains in place. And this is the type of thing that I think preys on people's minds when they are considering whether to opt in or to opt out.
Because as you say, this thing's going to be there for the rest of your life, and who's to say what the next government or the government after decides to bring in. And they have a habit of slowly eroding certain rights and things like privacy, and who could say where it is in 20 years? And at that point, you can't go back and take out the last 20 years of data. Is there a nuke button that you can push to say, I don't want to be in this anymore? I guess you could go in and manually delete everything.
Well, you can manually delete each document or put a document access code over the top of it. And you can even delete your whole record. But I think we need to re-examine the meaning of delete in this context, because really it looks like it means deactivate. It'll still sit there, inaccessible to you, inaccessible to your doctors, potentially, though, inaccessible with a warrant or without one, to law enforcement in certain specific cases. This law enforcement question is a particularly interesting one. You don't want to get too tinfoil hat about it, but the fact is that police do sometimes go to doctors and hospitals now and request data in the process of investigating certain cases. Doctors generally do require a warrant, and they do know when data is being released. I think what people are particularly nervous about here in this case is they're taking the power out of the hands of doctors, and it's an open question too whether the My Health record holder will even be informed when the agency releases information to law enforcement. And the fact that you can't really ever get rid of your record once one has been created for you, that'll be kept for 30 years after your death even, is a little too long for some people's liking, even though I think it is required by law that the agency do that.
So, Alex, you're back. You just missed Ariel, which seems very suspicious.
Look, I just had to duck into this nearby phone booth for reasons of my own. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see.
A likely story. Anyway, speaking of mysterious things landing, the Nvidia Shield TV has finally landed in Australia. Unfortunately, my review unit's kind of lost in the mail. It's not far away, I'm told, but you, Alex, you've had a good play with it. What is Nvidia Shield TV, and where does it fit into our lounge rooms?
Well, the Shield TV will fit into pretty much any lounge room because amongst streaming boxes, it's really one of the smallest, although it's also one of the more kind of oddly shaped. It has this kind of angular polygonal look, which ties in really well with the way Nvidia does a lot of its branding, but just does look a little bit weird for most home decor items. But it's essentially another Android TV set-top box, and when they first said, we're bringing this to Australia, I've got to admit, I was a little bit initially underwhelmed because I just thought, well, we've already got a whole bunch of these, and the Shield TV itself is a couple of years old now. The model we're getting is the 2017 revision, so I wasn't particularly prepared to be blown away by it. And I'm a man who's often accused of being overly cynical, but I was really very, very impressed with what it offers.
How much do they want for it?
So the base model is $239. That gets you a Shield TV and a remote control. There's a more high-cost version which bundles in a games controller, which plays to one of the strengths of the Shield TV. Nvidia's a company whose culture is in producing GPUs, and these days most GPUs seem to be being pushed towards creating cryptocurrency, but strictly speaking they're meant to be for gaming. And so the Shield TV is really built around both Android gaming and streaming PC gaming, which is not something that you see on other competing streaming TV boxes of the like of the Foxtel Now box or the Vodafone TV box.
Okay, so it's basically two different things. It's a media player and it's a games box. Maybe looking at it first as a media player, as you say, we've seen a few Android TV boxes. We got one from Telstra, one from Foxtel, one from, I want to say Vodafone. How does it stack up against them? Where are they? Have we got apps, or are we missing apps? Because I know sometimes the the providers will say, like Foxtel might only let that app be on certain devices. What are you in for, and what are you missing out if you go for an Nvidia Shield TV?
Well, the bad news here is that we're still waiting for that one box which has got everything. Because the
one box to rule them all, yeah.
Exactly, and in front of the TV screen bind them. The Shield doesn't have everything, which is a pity, and it doesn't have what I consider to be the two best catch-up streaming services in Australia, iView and SBS On Demand. Now, Nvidia reps tell me that they're working on it, that these things are coming, and certainly as I said, the Shield itself has been around for a couple of years, and Nvidia has done a fair bit of software work on this platform. So there's hope, and it does act itself as a 4K capable Chromecast. Now, the Foxtel Now box does the same thing, so does the Vodafone.
So does the Chromecast.
Of course, of course. But the point with that being, you can then push iView or SBS On Demand or even Foxtel Now, because that's now Chromecast compatible out to it. That works, but it's less convenient. The thing that I particularly like about the Shield for media streaming is that it's really fast, because they've built it essentially on one of their graphics processors, where everyone else basically gets the cheapest MediaTek, usually, processor that they can throw into a box that's just about capable of doing 4K decoding. This thing's got room to breathe. And what that means is not only can it do 4K HDR, it's also really slick in the menus. I know you've played, I think, with the Foxtel and the Vodafone set-top boxes, and they work, and even the Telstra TV.
They're clunky as though.
Exactly.
Some were nicer than others, but neither of them were beautiful. None of them were beautiful. So does it have a 4K HDR Netflix client on it? I'm not sure about 4K HDR Netflix. It's 4K HDR for Amazon Prime, which was a big thing when they launched it in the States, because at that point no Android TV box had Amazon Prime. Not sure if it does HDR on Netflix off the top of my head. It certainly does 4K for it. Yeah. And obviously there's only a relatively small band of HDR titles on Netflix anyway. But the nice thing there also is, because of the way it does Android TV itself, you get quite a smart interface that shows you content you might want to watch within the app without launching the app. So it's very akin, both in its approach and indeed in its pricing, to the Apple TV approach, where you get that kind of nice, friendly, easily scrollable, easily searchable interface. Now, one thing we're not getting here straight away, again, is Google Assistant. It's Google Assistant ready in the States, not so here yet. Again, they say they're working on it. That's the same with a lot of things, though. I don't think blame Nvidia for that. There's so many products in Australia that have Google Assistant compatible, asterisks next to it. Sometime, maybe by the end of the year, we hope, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, what that means right now, though, is if you genuinely want or you have need of a voice-controlled TV box, this is not going to do it for you.
Yeah.
In fact, off the top of my head, I'd say pretty much only the Apple TV is going to do that for you via Siri, because I don't think any of the others really work all that well, although I guess you could buy a really high-end LG TV and trust their thin Q client to understand what you're saying, but again, that can be a bit shaky. Yeah. But that aside, it's a really pleasant device to use for general streaming purposes. And unlike, for example, Foxtel, where their Android TV box is really locked down, so Kodi doesn't work and Plex doesn't work, they're totally fine with both those working. And in fact, because it's got USB out on the back, you can actually plug in an external media source and use it as its own Plex server.
Oh, that's okay. So you can run an Android Plex server on it, and because it's got more grunt. Because that's the thing, if you want to use it as a Plex server, it has to have grunt, especially if you're moving around high def video, especially if it's going to have to be transcoding. So that's a nice thing to know, that you could actually use it to serve everything else around your house as well.
Yeah, you're paying a premium price for it against those competing boxes, don't get me wrong, but you're getting a premium set of features for streaming enthusiasts. And
so on the flip side of that, how does it stack up as a gaming box?
It's really it's interesting, because it's almost on the way to being its own games console, but not quite there. It's better as an Android gaming platform than anything I've tested. In fact, Nvidia do their own optimization of certain games that you can buy pretty much exclusively for this device. So where your typical Android game is, some kind of vaguely weird tower defense game of a brand you've never heard of, you can buy versions
that's secretly
of Borderlands.
Crypto mining on your phone.
Well, quite possibly. You can buy versions of Tomb Raider or Borderlands for this thing, and they work quite well. There is a little bit of a catch there, though, because Nvidia hasn't really adjusted the pricing on those games, so you could probably buy them for PC, especially through Steam, may be a little bit cheaper, especially during sale time. And it's kind of covered for that as well, because as long as you've got an Nvidia GPU in your PC, you can stream games direct to it. Nvidia optimized for specific titles.
So it's like a Steam Link box, but for Nvidia games.
Well, both, actually. It'll do a set of games. Basically, it'll scan your PC and say, right, what games have you got that we support? In my case, from a library of about 300 odd Steam games, it found about a dozen. And I'm not huge on, I'm more on the console gaming space these days. So other people may have a completely different experience. But it found about a dozen and it said, right, yep, we've got optimizations for these. We'll run these. They just appear as though they're an app within the interface. There's nothing else to do.
But if you had a Steam Link box, pretty much all of those games would work, wouldn't they? I think.
Well, yes, but this can also act effectively as a Steam Link. It can launch Steam Big Picture Mode, which is what the Steam Link does, as a client. It runs that. Now, I hit some issues, and digging around online, these are not super uncommon, but it may vary depending on your configuration, where the Steam Link interface itself was kind of flickery, and I had to muck around a bit more than I would like. Having said that, I think an awful lot of PC gamers are familiar with the phrase, I had to muck around a bit more than I would like when trying to get their games running. So
and this is when the console people are laughing at you over the fence, yes.
Potentially, yes. But basically, if you've got it on Steam, you can probably run it. And if it's one of their supported games, it'll run, and typically quite well. I've used a Steam Link in the same environment, and I found the Nvidia TV tended to do just a little bit better. I didn't quite have two panels set up so I could do it side by side to check that. But subjectively speaking, it seemed to hold signal and not lag as much, because the worst thing for those streaming systems is when you drop a frame and you suddenly realize, oh crud, I didn't shoot that guy and now I'm dead.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Ariel for joining us for the show.
Thank you.
As always, we love to get your listener feedback, so feel free to comment via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks everyone for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button, and if you've already subscribed, leave us a review. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.